So once again, thank you all for coming. And we're going to be looking today through the transits for this next lunation cycle. We're starting off with the Virgo new moon, which actually was yesterday. And while I usually try to have these workshops before the new moon, but as close as possible, it was not humanly possible with my schedule to have it happen before. So I would like to say we're still within orb of the new moon, but we are here the day after. So it just was the Virgo new moon, and then we're going to be looking at the Libra lunation cycle, because just a couple days after the new moon, the sun shifts into Libra with the autumn equinox, and then the rest of the lunation cycle takes place in cardinal signs. The cardinal signs are the signs that begin the season. So when the sun is in any of the cardinal signs, Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, or Libra, it is the start to the new season. And so that's what this particular lunation cycle will be. Wow, I'm speaking about the sun, and I'm getting blessed by sunlight dazzling across the screen right now. So we'll get to see as the light probably obscures me a bit and then moves on. So in terms of the structure for how we're going to move through this, following the usual pattern of these workshops, I'm going to go through the lunation cycle first. I call this the scaffolding for the month of looking at each of those quadrature alignments. And that term quadrature alignment just refers to the angular relationships between two planetary bodies, in this case, the sun and the moon. So either when they're in conjunction, when they are next to each other, or when they are in a square, which is the 90-degree angle, or when they're in opposition, when they are opposite each other and the earth is in the middle. So the conjunction is the new moon, the waxing quarter moon is the square, the opposition is the full moon, and the waning quarter moon is the closing square. So that'll be our scaffolding. I will share a view of the chart so that you can see what's going on with the planets, and I can point out those angular relationships between the sun and the moon. And as is often the case, but feels especially potent this month, there are a few other transits that are perfecting, meaning they are reaching their exact alignment on those significant dates of the quarter moon or the new moon. So we'll see how those other transits between other planets really color the quality of those quadrature alignments between the sun and the moon. So once we go through that pattern, we kind of make our journey through the cycle of the month, then we will go back through the month, and I'll just pull forward a few key transits that really stand out. A couple of the inner planets ingressing into new signs. Ingressing just means when they cross from one sign of the zodiac into another. Or some of the other major alignments that inner planets are making to the outer planets, just so you can get a sense of the narrative and the progression throughout the month. This month does feel as though the whole confluence of transits is much more challenging. I know this has already been a very challenging year with the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium in Capricorn. It has defined the year in such intense ways, with the pandemic, with social upheaval and unrest and protests against police brutality and violence, with, I was just about to refer to the fires here on the West Coast as a plane flew overhead scouting for any other fires starting. So it feels very present right now, and countless other ways that the challenges of this year and really the suffering of this year have been coming through, and how that's correlated with particularly the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, but also how it's really amplified or magnified by the qualities of Jupiter. So the most dominant alignment besides that Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium is the fact that Mars, which is the planet associated with the archetype of fire, anger, assertion, aggression, violence, the will to do and take action. It is that warrior energy. It is that athletic energy. It's the fire in our blood. Mars is making a long square to that Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium. So a square is it's a hard angle. It's a challenging angle. And Mars seems to be taking on, you could almost say, the status of an outer planet, because the outer planets move more slowly. So the outer planets, therefore, they define years, epochs, eras when they're in alignment with each other. And Mars has really been a major player this year. It conjoined the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium in March and April, right at the time that the pandemic was igniting, catching fire in that sense, how quickly it seemed to spread and take hold and all the changes coming through. Mars also has been a major player throughout the summer in more complex ways as it aligned with the eclipses and with Neptune and a variety of other more complex alignments to distill quickly, but still really coming through in that fiery, impatient, angered, and even violent form. And then now that we are in late summer, turning into the autumn, Mars has stationed retrograde, or it did station retrograde on September 9th. Now it's moving retrograde back through its own home sign of Aries. So Mars is in its domain. It is not inhibited in its expression of self in terms of its being in its home sign, but it is under challenging conditions because it is retrograde and because it is square the stellium. And Saturn and Pluto in particular have the effect on Mars of trying to contain it, that's Saturn, and repress it, that's Pluto. But it can also make it more difficult, more challenging, more frustrating with Saturn, and more intensified, and with the volcanic capacity to boil over with Pluto. And Jupiter, again, it amplifies, it magnifies, and makes it bigger. So that's all coming in at once in relation to Mars. And as I mentioned, Mars stationed on September 9th. And that day, for anyone living in California, or just paying attention to the photos coming out of California, especially the Bay Area, September 9th was the day that the sky turned orange, red, vermilion above San Francisco in the Bay Area. And there were thousands, still are many fires, but thousands of fires across the state, and smokes filling the sky, blocking out the sun. And on that day, so many pictures of this orange world were being shared. And the color of the sky was the color of Mars. I saw this extraordinary image someone had put together. First, a still from the film Mad Max Fury Road, which is this vermilion, red, orange. And then right next to it, another still from the film Blade Runner 2049, exact same color. Then an image of Mars itself on the surface, exact same color. And then finally at the bottom, an image of the San Francisco skyline, the exact same color. And it was even dated San Francisco, September 9th, 2020, which is the day that Mars stationed retrograde. So it's just extraordinary to see how the archetypes are coming through so clearly. It's like being in a living laboratory, and it's absolutely terrifying. And one also can't help but marvel at the creativity of the universe in showing up in such clear ways. It feels like the cosmos is saying, pay attention. Pay attention to what is happening to your world. Is it not enough that everyone is getting sick? Is it not enough that nobody can have a nuanced conversation anymore? Is it not enough that the world is literally burning? And I feel like we can feel that in how clearly and directly and exactly the transits are coming through. We barely even have to, it's not if you only pay attention, it's like screaming at us to make note of what is going on. So that those are our larger conditions. And once I get into some of the key transits of this month, you'll see how Mercury and also the Sun will be highlighting that Mars square Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. So it's really coming in some very clear and intensified ways. So let me share this image of the transits first for the new moon that happened yesterday. All right, and can everyone see that? Oops. Let me see. Okay, so, okay. With, just trying to get all this to line up here. All right. Okay, technicalities. So this is the chart for the transits yesterday when the new moon was exact. You can see it down here in the late degrees of Virgo, and with Virgo in, or with the new moon in Virgo, which is a mutable earth sign ruled by Venus. Mutable signs come at the end of the season. Mutable meaning changeable. Uh, it is changing to the next season. And with the new moon in that sign, there is a kind of grounded, earthy quality to this particular new moon. And as I will speak about in these workshops, when one thinks of planting seeds of intention at the new moon, this new moon really has the quality of rich, fertile soil, that sense of the fertility that is associated with Virgo, this harvest sign. And at the same moment that the new moon was happening yesterday in Virgo, we had another exact alignment, and that was between Mercury here and Jupiter, making a 90-degree square between those planets, between Mercury and Jupiter. And I'm revising what I said. I think I just said that Virgo is a Venus-ruled sign. I'm already jumping ahead to Libra in my mind. It is a Mercury-ruled sign. Okay, so Mercury rules Virgo. It also finds its exaltation in Virgo. It's still an earth sign. So that part I at least said correctly. But I think it's really significant that Mercury, which rules Virgo, is squaring Jupiter at the same time as that new moon, because it's bringing those mercurial qualities of communication, the mind, the intellect, learning, ideas more to the fore, because Jupiter really amplifies Mercury. It's a storyteller's alignment. People who are born with Mercury, Jupiter tend to have that kind of storytelling, orator-like quality. And they can also have an abundance of things to say. Mercury, Jupiter is a very philosophical alignment. I found yesterday when the alignment was exact that all the conversations I was having were very philosophical in nature, going into rich ideas. And Jupiter offers hope. to what it touches, even when it is in difficult conditions. And I've been finding this more and more. The more people that I have spoken to throughout this year, throughout this challenging Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto year, the more I have been hearing people say that with it, despite the pandemic, despite the economic hardships, here and there, I hear someone say, well, it's offering me this opportunity I might not have had. It's offering the opportunity to move somewhere they've always wanted to because work is no longer in person. It's offering the opportunity to be at home more with one's children. It's offering the opportunity, and we can see both the shadow in this and also the hidden blessing. People being trapped at home, maybe with a partner that they're not in a good dynamic with, and realizing, what, this isn't working, and finally having the capacity to step out of that dynamic. So you can see these are hidden blessings. They're blessings that come through the challenge, and yet they're there nonetheless. And the more people I've spoken to, the more that adds up. Now, of course, it's not the case for everyone. This isn't to minimize suffering by any means, but just to see where Jupiter offers that kind of hope in the darkness. And with that alignment from Mercury to Jupiter that perfected yesterday at the new moon, the way that I was thinking about this was that when we plant our seeds of intention for this new moon, plant seeds of hope, plant seeds of abundance. And looking at the astrological conditions ahead, the weather ahead, it does not mean that all of those seeds of hope will come to fruition. Many of them won't germinate. Many of them won't come to flower, but some might. And so the more seeds that we plant for hope in abundance now, the more, a few at least, will be likely to come into fruition, to grow to the great heights that Jupiter can offer in potential. So now moving a few days forward to when the Sun enters Libra. The Sun enters Libra on the 22nd. And let me just jump forward. So here is the just a few hours ahead. Let me go ahead with this. There we go. So early in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, the Sun will enter into the sign of Libra. And here is Sun at 0 degrees Libra. It'll be just before sunrise on the West Coast, at least. And that also marks the fall equinox. And some of you may know that word, equinox. It means equal night. Nox is Latin for night. You may have heard that in Harry Potter with the spell to turn out the light on the wand. Nox turns out the light because it means night. So equinox, equal night. And we have the spring and the autumn equinox at this time of year. It is the time when the daylight hours are equal to the nighttime hours. And this has to do with where the Earth is in its orbit around the Sun. And so at these 2 points, the Sun is illuminating the angle of the Earth so that the day and night are equal at this time. Contrasting that with the solstices, solstice meaning sun, soul, stands still. The solstice at the summer and the winter points where it appears for 3 days as though the sun has stood still in its path, which of course actually reflects our path around the sun. So on this day, the sun ingresses into Libra. And I have to bring in the other element of my my scholarship and worlds of interest, because this is September 22nd that the sun moves into Libra. And for those of you who love the worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien, Middle Earth, this happens to be known as Hobbit Day. It is Bilbo Baggins and Frodo Baggins' birthday. And I think it's significant that their birthday falls on the autumn equinox, because the Lord of the Rings is a story of fall, of autumn. And the elves are on the road in autumn. And some may feel the call to adventure in the autumn. It is a time when the leaves fall to the ground and things begin to slumber, but there's that potential of new life below the surface of the earth. So Libra is a Venus-ruled, I have it right this time, a Venus-ruled air sign. You always think of that as like the winds kick up in early autumn and begin to blow the beautiful Venusian colored leaves onto the ground, making exquisite patterns and colors with those falling leaves. Now, moving forward to the waxing quarter moon, which takes place just the day after the fall equinox. You can see here the moon is now in Capricorn, making its 90-degree square to the sun in the first degree of Libra. And notice that the moon will be heading toward the stellium. This is always a time where we really feel, because that's the quality of the moon, feelings, emotions, our bodies, our psychosomatic sense of being, our inner world is associated with the moon. And as the moon moves across Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn the following day, we may feel that very intensely. But on the 23rd, with that waxing quarter moon in Capricorn, it happens simultaneously, yet again, with Mercury making an exact alignment to Saturn just a bit earlier in that day. And Capricorn is a Saturn-ruled sign. So the moon in a Saturnian sign, while Mercury makes this tight alignment to Saturn, brings qualities of Saturn to the fore. And when Mercury combines with Saturn, we find ourselves wrestling with hard problems or having difficult conversations. There can often be misperceptions and miscommunications that take place under Mercury-Saturn alignments. So if you are finding yourself in a difficult conversation around these days, just to know that these aren't the best conditions for, say, a nuanced conversation or for subtlety. It may be better, if possible, to wait. And if you can't, then just to have patience, to know that communication can be really challenging under Mercury square to Saturn. And I'll come back through after we move through the lunation cycle, just to point out all the alignments that Mercury is making throughout this month, because it is sweeping across that stellium opposing Mars. So I'll have more to say about this. Now, moving forward to the full moon, our full moon will be taking place in Aries. And so you can see here's the sun in Libra, now at 9 degrees, opposing the moon in Aries. And this is one of the sign polarities where you can really feel the oppositional qualities associated with these different signs. Venus is the ruler of Libra, and Aries is ruled by Mars. So you have that Venus-Mars polarity in opposition. Libra is much more harmonizing, seeking balance, seeking diplomacy, finding a way to smooth things over socially. But the full moon in Aries, you can see the moon is going to be approaching Mars by the next day, Mars, which rules Aries. It's a much more activated and fiery full moon. And I feel like this full moon very much reflects the Martian state of the world right now. That Mars archetype is so dominating the collective as it's coming through in all of its various aspects to Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, Mercury, the Sun, as this month progresses. And so the full moon in Aries feels very symbolic of that culmination, as we can see it coming through in these multifaceted ways. So the moon in Aries is much more inclined to take action, to do things, to get things going. It's a bit more impatient. It's a good time to clean your house, to put that physical energy to use in terms of taking care of a lunar space, the home, or taking care of the body, like really moving your body on that day if you are able to, because it's so activated. And then as we move to the waning square, the closing square, which will take place in Cancer. So very different energy from the moon in Aries. The moon in Cancer is in its own sign, the only moon ruled sign. And so you can see here the moon square exactly to the sun in Libra. But notice this larger patterning. The moon is opposite that stellium. It is making a grand cross with Mars. So really we can see here that major aspect pattern of the grand cross. Sun, square moon, sun, opposite Mars, moon, square Mars, Mars, square Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, sun coming in to square Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. So that's a very dynamic, arguably the most dynamic aspect pattern, because they're all hard angles, 2 oppositions, 4 squares. That is a lot of intensified dynamic energy really being activated, really being lit up by the luminaries, the sun and the moon. And just to make things even more intensified, I feel like I'm using that word a bit, but it really does describe the conditions. Mars makes its exact square to the middle of the stellium, exactly square Pluto on that day. Now, we had an alignment of Mars to Pluto in August, and now Mars retrograde is crossing back over again, making that exact square to Pluto. And this is really volcanic energy. If Mars is the fire, Pluto is the volcano. And together they have such like a driving of the instincts, of the libido, of the id in Freud's sense of the term. There can be a simmering of the temper, a kind of rage-filled quality. So this is energy that really needs to be expressed, because if it's stuffed down, it can take on its own unconscious power. Rage can turn into shame, which can motivate us to do all kinds of unconscious things and take that out on others or project it onto others. So it's really important to look at how you wield your power, how you take action during this time, and to direct those energies in a way that feels fruitful. The will is so empowered under a Mars-Pluto alignment. So if there's something that you need to work with to tackle, especially if it's something physical, then that is a really good place to direct these energies, because they want to come through somewhere. So you should at least try and direct the fire hose, but usually a fire hose is filled with water putting out a fire. The image I'm getting for this fire hose is a hose of fire. So you want to direct that fire somewhere where it feels empowering rather than repressive or shaming, whether that's of yourself or of others. Now, finally, to close out this cycle, let's look at the new moon in Libra. And this takes place on October 16th. Here you can see the new moon in the later degrees of Libra, not quite at the end yet. And that new moon is also carrying the same dynamic energies as that closing square. This time it isn't a grand cross. This time it's a T-square. Because we don't have the moon over here anymore in Cancer. We have it over here with the sun. And so the T-square configuration is this opposition to Mars, and then the square on either side to the stellium. Also very filled with tension. With the T-square, I often get the image of, being pulled in opposite directions, like a crucifix. You can kind of think of that with the Grand Cross too, where the tensions are pulling away from each other. It's extremely dynamic. And this may, as is very much the case for a lot of this month, this may be a challenging new moon, and one where the seeds of intention that you want to plant can feel difficult to plant something that feels hopeful and that feels inspiring. And I think that's okay. The metaphor that's been coming up for me as I reflect on this particular new moon is that when we plant seeds, they need darkness to germinate. You can't have a seed germinate when it's exposed to light. Darkness is a necessity. And by planting seeds of intention, when things feel challenging, when they feel heavy, these actually may be the most important intentions that you can plant, because it's acknowledging the real change, the real transformation that needs to take place in the world right now. And as much as probably all of us want to be able to affect collective change in some way or another, it does have to begin with ourselves and then our most intimate relationships, and see how that ripples outward. And so in terms of planting seeds at that new moon and keeping in mind now how the lunation has actually played out by the time this new moon comes around, well, we'll have the content by then. We know what intentions we will be planting. But to think, what lasting change do you want to plant those seeds for? And it may not be the kind of intention that comes to fruition in a single month. Maybe some of it will. Some of it will come about by that next full moon. But I'm thinking of this as longer lasting seeds of intention that will endure, that will survive through time, as is reflective, particularly of Saturn, Pluto, but as we can see, so highly activated at this time. And a phrase that keeps coming up for me in my memory as I think about not just this specific lunation or even this entire year and the mysteries that lie ahead of us as we navigate this very difficult time. It's a phrase that I actually heard my father say in a class once, where he said, "Dawn comes, and it comes for all, but not on command." And that phrase just keeps coming up for me when I think about that the dark night might be long, but dawn does come, and it will come for everyone, but not when we demand it. And that's part of trusting the deep mystery of life. So, coming back all together, I want to go through some of the other transits that are unfolding throughout this cycle. And so I'll be kind of moving back earlier in the month to explore some of these themes. And first of all, I want to talk about those alignments of Mercury in the square to the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium, and also in alignment with Mars. So you've seen that T-square at this point highlighted a number of times in the chart. But I just wanted to share the specific dates when Mars will make its, when Mercury will make its exact alignments to each of those planets. So as I mentioned, Mercury made its exact square to Jupiter yesterday with the new moon. And that's the philosophical, grandiose, big ideas expression of Mercury. And then just a few days later, Mercury will come into alignment with Pluto. That's the next one in the stellium. So that's September 21st, just this upcoming Monday. And Mercury, when combined with Pluto, brings in those plutonic depths, that desire to know, to go deep, to understand the hidden reaches of ideas. And there's a kind of voracious quality that comes in with Mercury Pluto's desire to understand, to explore what is hidden, what is buried. Now, Mercury with Pluto can also have a paranoid quality to it. There can be this kind of paranoia, this sense of like slander or gossip that can be present. I think with all of these Mercury alignments, really seeing, what's coming forth in the media, because Mercury's connected to the media. And with Mercury Pluto, what information is being hidden? How are thinking processes being manipulated? That can be a very Mercury Pluto quality. If you want to really dive deep into the archetypal complex of Mercury Pluto, read 1984 or reread it. That idea of doublespeak and manipulation of language. So Mercury Pluto can be the empowered voice, but it also can be manipulation and lies, and again, that kind of paranoid thinking. And then building with those challenges, we come to September 23rd. That was the same date as the moon in its waxing square to the sun. Mercury makes its square to Saturn. So in its more challenging effects, that's the one that's connected to difficult conversations, misunderstandings, misperceptions. But in a more positive light, Mercury Saturn can be clear thinking. It can be precise communication. It also can just be a time of inward reflection. Saturn negates Mercury. It negates the voice. And so if one can spend that time more in quiet, in inward focus, it can be a better direction for that Mercury Saturn energy. And then directly on the heels of that day, Mercury comes into opposition with Mars. So this is September 24th that Mercury makes its exact alignment opposite to Mars. And we have to remember that Saturn is still going to be inhibiting Mercury. Pluto is still going to be kind of intensifying the energy with that, but Mercury with Mars can really have an argumentative quality to it. And if you're finding yourself feeling frustrated during that time, that you have anger you want to express, but because Saturn's still there, you can't express it. You can work with this how you want, but it's something like, instead of to avoid a shouting match or an argument with someone, write down the angry letter and then burn it to ashes. So it still gets expressed. It still finds an outlet, but it's also maybe not going to cause as much lasting harm if you took it out on another human being. And by another human being, I don't just mean other people, I also mean yourself. So really track how you're speaking to yourself during this time, especially with Mercury Saturn. We can really think or speak negatively to ourselves, or with Mercury Mars, aggressively to ourselves. So just remembering that, keeping that in mind, being conscious of how you speak, what ideas you're engaged in, and how you think internally as well. Right after making those really challenging alignments, Mercury ingresses into Scorpio. So it moves out of Libra and into the watery underworld, Mars-ruled realm of Scorpio. This is on September 27th. And this is a sign that Mercury is going to be spending a while in, because this is the sign it's going to go retrograde in. Our last Mercury retrograde was in Cancer, so water sign. The one before that was in Pisces, another water sign. There's a theme here. Mercury retrograde periods happen in the same sign until they, not the same sign, the same element, until they shift following into the next cycle. So Mercury retrograde periods are always in a trine to each other, in the same element. So if you remember back to around February, when Mercury was in Pisces, a lot of misinformation, a lot of very kind of watery, confusing ways of communicating about things. This is when the pandemic was really being downplayed. Mercury then went retrograde again, next water sign in Cancer. That was in the middle of the summer. And then now it's going to be retrograde in the last water sign, Scorpio. And this will carry connotations that are already familiar from Mercury moving in the square to particularly Mars, but also Pluto. When we use traditional rulerships, Scorpio is ruled by Mars. Modern rulerships assigned it to Pluto. So, and we can see how there are really Plutonic qualities associated with Scorpio. So that secretive nature, but it's also very watery, kind of underwater, underworld realm as well. And something that, so the day that Mercury will turn retrograde is October 13th. So 2 weeks after it ingresses into Scorpio. And the day that it stations direct happens to be the US's election day. And as I recently learned from the astrology podcast that Chris Brennan hosts, the last time that Mercury stationed on the US's election day was in 2000. So if we recall how that presidential election went, with a lot of confusion, recounting, there is definitely a heightened possibility for there to be a lot of misinformation and confusion around the election. The big difference is that in 2000, Mercury stationed retrograde on election day. So it was retrograde the 3 weeks following the election. This time it's going to be retrograde leading up to the election. So there is a difference, but either way, how significant that within a 2-decade period, Mercury stations on the exact day of the US election. Certainly something worth contemplating when we think about the universe's rather precise timing. The other ingress that we see during this cycle is Venus. Venus will ingress into Virgo, so it moves out of Leo, where it is right now, and on October 2nd will move into Virgo. And traditionally, Venus is seen to be in its fall when it is in Virgo, but because it is somewhat contrary to its nature. From a more participatory or archetypal perspective, though, I think that we can take that understanding of essential dignity and look at still the multiplicity of ways that it can come through. And Venus in Virgo, which is a Mercury-ruled sign, got it right this time, really wants to be expressed through logic, through words, through communication. And so we see the aesthetic, for example, of Venus in Virgo as everything has its right place. It's all beautifully aesthetically thought out. Everything that is practical should also be beautiful. Everything that's beautiful definitely ought to be practical as well. So there's a logic and a care that comes in with the aesthetic and loving expression of Venus in Virgo. And in terms of a practice of engaging with Venus in this sign, I was thinking, what would it look like to write a love letter, to one's own heart? So now moving to the next set of alignments, we've looked at Mercury moving through the stellium and opposite Mars, and its ingression into Scorpio. We've looked at Venus ingressing into Virgo. And now I want to touch on what Mars itself is doing, because while it is just kind of sitting there in that square to Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, during this window of time, it does make exact alignments first to Saturn and then to Pluto. So this is its second pass over the stellium. And the day that Mars squares Saturn exactly is September 29th. That happens to be the same day that Saturn turns direct, which I think is interesting, that they happen simultaneously. So Mars, which is usually all about forward motion, is retrograde. Saturn, which is very slow, suddenly goes direct. So these two energies are really pulling in opposite directions. That creates a lot of friction, the potential for a lot of frustration. This is a good day to get out your hammer and just hammer nails into a board, or be more constructive, build something. Try avoiding banging your head against a wall if you can, but it might be that kind of time period as well. But it's a good time to look at how can you sustain your energy? How can you plan for the long game? Because this is a long game. Mars is in alignment with these planets for quite a while. And so how are you going to find endurance? Think of the marathon runner in terms of that Mars-Saturn alignment. This is not the sprinter. This is someone who's planning on having their energy last through a long period of time. Now, the next alignment as Mars moves retrograde that it makes is that square to Pluto. And we already spoke about that, how it's going to happen on the same day, October 9th, as that waning quarter moon, the moon in Cancer square to the sun. So that's the one that's the really intensified volcanic energy. And again, if finding ways to express that through the body, I think can be the most helpful outlet for moving the energy through. Unless you happen to live on a volcanic island. And then I would say literally go be present with a volcano. It's probably one of the best ways to channel that energy. So if you're in Hawaii, if you're in Iceland, or somewhere else that has active lava. Otherwise, for the rest of us who don't have that, finding ways to move it through in a more embodied sense can be helpful. So finally, the last pass through the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, Mars configuration is from the sun. And we already saw some of this in terms of the sun-moon dynamics with that waning quarter moon and the new moon. But again, I just wanted to give you the dates for the days that the sun is crossing each one of those planets. And the way that we understand that solar archetype to show up in world transits versus in a natal chart is a little different. They're definitely archetypally related. But in a natal chart, when we look at the sun, we're really looking at the symbol of the self, of the identity, your autonomous being, your will to exist and shine and so forth. In the world transits, the sun often acts as something that brings focus to whatever it touches. It highlights it, it makes it clear. And so with the sun crossing at hard angles to the stellium and also to Mars, that T-square, it's really focusing the energy on those alignments. And we can see this as what astrologers call a trigger transit. So it may trigger elements of what already has been playing out throughout the year, but in more clear and direct ways. So the sun will make its exact square to Jupiter on October 11th. It'll make its exact square to Mars on October 13th, the day that Mercury turns retrograde. It'll make its exact square to Pluto on October 15th. And finally, just after the new moon, the sun will make its exact square to Saturn on October 18th. And so this, again, it's really just focusing attention and energy on each of those planets and therefore highlighting their archetypes. So Sun square Jupiter, highlighting growth, expansion, grandiosity, inflation. So we can definitely see some ego inflation that could potentially happen with this alignment, but also highlighting abundance, highlighting riches, even daring in the midst of this time to highlight joy and joviality. My goodness, do we need that? Then with the sun coming into opposition with Mars just 2 days later, this time it's focusing and highlighting that fiery, energetic, embodied, action-oriented will to do. And then with the sun squaring Pluto, it's really highlighting the underworld dimension, the death, rebirth mystery, the descent, dismemberment, transformation, transmutation, the phoenix in its process of dying into the flames, being reborn from the ashes. It's the snake shedding its skin. And then finally, when the sun makes its square to Saturn, and notice, by the way, these are coming in a little bit of a different order than when Mercury crossed them. Mercury crossed Jupiter, then Pluto, then Saturn, then Mars. By the time the sun is doing this, a couple weeks later, it's Jupiter, then Mars, because it's moved backwards, then Pluto, then Saturn. So Mars is just shifted during that time. And so that alignment, that final alignment of the sun square to Saturn coming just after the new moon brings the focus this time onto endings, onto finitude, onto boundaries, loss, suffering, to mortality, to death. It's a really scary thing to look at. Look at Saturn, to look death in the eye. But this is one of the things that Saturn brings forward as an archetypal principle. And with that recognition of the Saturnian archetype, we can see, what do we want to commit to? What do we want to take on as our personal responsibility? How can we become an authority in whatever area we're focusing our attention? And where can we seek, find, experience wisdom? Where is wisdom in the midst of this time? Because that's also what the sun highlighting Saturn has to offer. It's the wisdom of experience. And if this time is doing anything that is positive, it is forging something. It is forging something that will be enduring, that will be lasting in the midst of so much letting go and shedding, and really marking the end of an old cycle, the end of an old world, and then seeing, well, what new can regenerate out of that. It's like the experience of thinking, the world has ended. Oh, but I'm still here. So what do I do now? What do I do now at this moment? So I'll leave it there on that somewhat somber note, and want to thank you all for going on that planetary journey with me, really looking at a lot of hard angles. There wasn't a lot of softness or sweetness coming in overall. But being able to find strength in response to these conditions, I think, can really show us what we're made of. And that in itself can perhaps be a profound gift. So thank you.